Welcome to environmental chemistry. We have gone so far already, and now we're almost there. So the environmental chemistry unit is not like our matter and chemical change unit, where we looked at the periodic table, how chemicals come together, what breaks them apart, how they work, all of that stuff. Here we actually look at the big picture. Like, how do chemicals exist in our environment? How do they make up the fabric of our world? How do they interact with each other? But in a bigger way, not making chemicals. And what role do humans have in chemistry and how that chemistry reacts into our environment? So, as you already know, chemicals not a bad word. Plants and animals are made up of chemicals. They take in chemicals for energy. They give chemicals back to the environment. Chemicals both support and can harm the environment. So animals consume chemicals like glucose. Humans breathe in oxygen and breathe out carbon dioxide. And humans introduce pesticides and fertilizers into the environment. Right now, I want you to kind of think of some examples where you have chemicals that support living things and some where the chemicals are actually harmful. So this is going to be different for each of you depending on your past experience, but hopefully during the course of this unit, we'll be able to all talk about what these different ones are. So how do chemicals enter the bodies of animals, plants, those kind of things? So there's really only three ways. You can eat them by ingestion, so you're putting it in. Digest them, so when you're taking them, you can physically break apart chemicals or expose chemicals once they get into your stomach. And then absorption, where the chemical passes through the body through different membranes. So there's a few examples there showing you how we can take chemicals into our bodies. Toxic chemicals are chemicals that disrupt or damage the body system. So, for example, lead, mercury, they're heavy metals. They can be very dangerous to our bodies. Drugs and medicine can help, but they also can harm if you have them in an overdose. Certain pesticides and fertilizers actually can harm us as well as plants. Some chemicals, when they're ingested or absorbed, are very, very difficult for the body to break down or eliminate. And this is really important. If we can break them down and eliminate them, generally they're not going to harm us too much because we're going to get them out of us quick. The problem is if we can't break them down and we can't eliminate them, then what happens? So what happens is bioaccumulation. So bioaccumulation is when something toxic gets absorbed or ingested inside of a body faster than it can be broken down or excreted. So this is often linked to toxins being able to be soluble in lipids, which is our fat. So if it is soluble in our lipids, it stays there forever. Now our fat, we can increase and we can decrease, but it never actually goes away. We don't actually like poop it out. So when that doesn't go away, it's staying inside of our bodies. And that means that over time, the more that we ingest or absorb or digest, we're just building up inside of our bodies more and more and more of those chemicals. Now, the places where we store them is in fat molecules around our bodies or our brain, because they're able to cross the lipid barrier and they sit in our brain. Now, that's a bad thing. So one of my favorite shows was Alice in Wonderland, and I actually didn't really love the whole show, but I really loved the Tea Party. Loved the Tea Party. And the Mad Hatter was hilarious. But what was really cool to me is when I started teaching this, I realized that Mad Hatter's disease is actually just mercury poisoning. And it's because mercury goes into our brains and it actually sits there. It never goes away and it keeps accumulating and accumulating and accumulating and drives us insane. Now, Mad Hatter's disease comes from the absorption of the chemicals, and it came from the people who were making the hats. So the felting process of making the felt hats actually contained mercury in one of the steps of it, and that is where they would get that accumulation of the mercury and they would go mad. Biomagnification, on the other hand, is the concentration of a chemical as it goes through the food chain. So the more it goes through the food chain, the higher up you are, the more of these toxins you actually get. And this is what our simulation is going to be in our face-to-face class. So if you have a tiny organism like phytoplankton or zooplankton, and they are floating around in the surface, because most of them can't really swim around very well. So they're floating around the surface and chemicals get dropped into the water system. They're going to absorb or take in those chemicals, sometimes even by ingestion. They're going to pull these in, and once they've pulled them in, what's going to happen is, because they go into a fat area, they're just going to sit in their body. The longer they sit there, the more they'll absorb, but their body's not that big. So as they get eaten by the zooplankton are getting extra of the chemical because it's already accumulated in the phytoplankton, and then the zooplankton eat the phytoplankton and they get all of the phytoplankton's toxin because it can't go anywhere. It lives in the fats, and so that fats portion gets absorbed into the zooplankton's body. So it goes from the zooplankton to the herring, to the salmon, and then to your highest area. So basically, as it goes through each level, it just magnifies or increases all the way through the food chain. And what you find is the top predators are the most affected by these toxins. So there are kind of two main ones in the world that we talk about a lot as humans. We talk about mercury through the fish and through the aquatic environment, and we talk about DDT. So I found this to be one of the most helpful graphics, and I know that my face is covering part of it, but you can look at it on your own in the PowerPoint section. So I would almost go back into the PowerPoint section, take this out, and stick it into your vocabulary part because it's awesome. So the bioaccumulation is the buildup of a contaminant over time in one animal. But biomagnification is the buildup of a contaminant as you go through the food chain, resulting in your top predator having the most. So that is the two main differences between those. Bioaccumulation, one animal. Biomagnification, through the entire food chain. So in our face-to-face class, like I was just saying, is we are going to have an example of biomagnification. And so there's also another video on that you guys can watch. This is an example here on the screen of how people advertised about how wonderful DDT was. And DDT was something that parents would actually bathe their children in to prevent them from getting sick. Now, we know now that that's not actually a good thing. DDT is not good for you. It's not good for the environment. It does terrible, terrible things. Not necessarily to humans, but it does terrible, terrible things. But we didn't know. So one thing in this unit, as we look at the big picture, is it's really become, the more we know, the more we know we need to find out. So we are not experts as humans. We make mistakes, and like some of our mistakes have costly consequences. And one of our consequences with DDT is we almost made species go extinct, and not just one, but multiple, because we had no idea that as we were trying to save ourselves and eliminate what we considered to be a pest, we were actually poisoning a whole food chain. So it's really interesting to look at this now and see how much better we've become, but also to see how much further we need to go. So when talking about DDT, just so you know, it totally will be on the test, the name of DDT. Just kidding. But the name is dichloro-diphenyl trichloroethane. Ethane. I'll say it again. Dichloro-diphenyl trichloroethane. And it was used to kill the insects that spread the disease to humans. So the main diseases that they were worried about was malaria and typhus, because these two diseases were killing more soldiers during the war than actual battle, which is a huge problem because we needed them for battle. So we did not want them dying of a disease. So they found a way to kill the insects. Sounds like a great thing. The only problem is that as it went through the ecosystem, we found all of a sudden all of these eagles, especially the eagles, were dying. And why they were dying, we had no idea. But it ended up coming back to the fact that as that DDT was accumulated through their, or biomagnified through their food chain, that when it got to that top predator, the eagles, their eggshells were so fragile that when the mom sat on the egg to keep it warm and protect it, they'd crush it. Their shell had no strength, and the strength that was lost was because of the DDT in their system. So we almost completely lost our eagle population, and we also almost lost indirectly a fox population. So that's what we will be looking at in our assignment this week. So, how could bioaccumulation and biomagnification of DDT cause harm to the ecosystem, including the birds of prey? So this is on our Google form that you guys are going to be looking at, and there's a whole bunch of videos to watch about DDT. Now, of course, I'm going to recommend that you watch them all. However, if you watch a few of them and you're like, I can completely answer these questions, you're welcome to go and try after it. Make sure you watch the fox one. It's really cool. Okay, I will let you go and get started on those.